Ever wonder what life was like for the early American colonists? No electricity, no indoor plumbing, no cars. It sounds tough, right? And it was. But people are incredibly resourceful. They developed ingenious tools and objects to make their daily grind a little easier, their homes a bit more comfortable, and even to have some fun. Today, we're diving into the past to uncover 13 everyday objects that were essential in colonial America. Some of them might really surprise you. Let's start with a life or death situation. Fire. In a world of wooden houses and open hearths, a single spark could mean disaster. With no fire departments, the whole community had to act fast. That's where our first object comes in, the fire bucket. These weren't your average plastic pails. They were made of heavy-duty leather, often personalized with the owner's name, and kept right by the front door, ready to go. When the alarm bell rang, everyone would grab their bucket and form a human chain, passing water from the nearest well or river to douse the flames. It was a true community effort, all centered around this simple but vital tool. Now let's head to the fields. How did colonists get their food? A lot of it came from grain, like wheat. But before you can make bread, you have to separate the edible part of the grain from its husk. This process is called threshing, and it required our second object, the flail. Picture two sticks connected by a leather strap or a short chain. One stick is a long handle, and the other, shorter one, is called a swingle. The farmer would swing the handle, bringing the swingle down hard on the harvested grain, beating the seeds loose. It was exhausting, repetitive work, but without the flail, there'd be no flour and no bread on the table. When the sun went down, how did people see inside their homes? That brings us to our third set of objects. Candles. But not all candles were created equal. The most common and cheapest were tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat. As you can imagine, they didn't smell great and produced a lot of smoke. A much nicer option came from the bayberry bush. Colonists would boil the berries to skim off a greenish, sweet-smelling wax. These bayberry candles were a real treat. But the best of the best, the luxury option, was a candle made from spermaceta and waxy substance found in the head of a sperm whale. These candles burned incredibly bright and clean, with no smoke or bad odor. Of course, they were also the most expensive, a true sign of wealth in a colonial home. Okay, so you've threshed your grain and lit your candle. What are you wearing? Chances are, your clothes were homemade, likely from sheep's wool. And a crucial step in turning a fluffy fleece into wearable fabric involved our fourth object, wool cards. These were a pair of flat wooden paddles covered in tiny wire teeth, almost like dog brushes. You take a clump of raw, messy wool and pull it between the two cards, over and over. This process, called carding, untangled the fibers and aligned them all in the same direction. It was tedious, but it prepared the wool for spinning into thread, which would then be woven into cloth. Without wool cards, colonists would have been very cold and very ragged. Now, what about education? Schooling wasn't universal, especially for girls. But many children learned the basics using our fifth object, the hornbook. This wasn't a book in the way we think of one. It was a small wooden paddle, shaped a bit like a cutting board. A piece of paper with the alphabet, numbers, and maybe the Lord's Prayer was attached to it. To protect the paper, it was covered with a thin, translucent sheet made from polished animal horn, hence the name, hornbook. It was a child's first primer, a durable and simple tool for learning to read in a time when books were precious and rare. For young girls from well-to-do families, another kind of book was essential for their education, the sampler. This is our sixth object. A sampler was a piece of cloth where a girl practiced and showcased her needlework skills. It was her resume in a way. She'd start with simple letters and numbers, then move on to poems, family records, or intricate scenes. A beautifully stitched sampler showed she was diligent, skilled, and ready for the duties of managing a household. These weren't just practice sheets. They were works of art, often framed and displayed with pride. Of course, life wasn't all work and no play. Colonial children didn't have video games or plastic toys, so they made their own fun with things they found around the house. This brings us to object number 7, the whirligig. It's a brilliantly simple toy. You take a flat disc, maybe a piece of bone, clay, or even a large button, and thread a loop of string through 2 holes in the center. By pulling the string taut and then relaxing it, you could get the disc spinning incredibly fast, making a satisfying whirring or buzzing sound. It was the fidget spinner of the 17th century, providing hours of simple entertainment. With all those smoky tallow candles and unwashed bodies, How did they keep their homes from smelling terrible? Enter our eighth object, the pomander. The name comes from the French for apple of amber. You take an orange, stud it all over with cloves, and then rub it with other spices. The pomander would be hung by a ribbon, slowly releasing a pleasant, spicy fragrance that helped mask less agreeable odors. It was a natural air freshener, and they were especially popular as decorations during the holidays, making the house look and smell festive. Let's talk about staying warm. Colonial houses were notoriously drafty and cold, especially at night. Getting into a bed with ice-cold sheets was no fun. That's why many homes had our ninth object, a warming pan. This was a long-handled pan, usually made of brass or copper, with a hinged lid. Before bed, you'd fill the pan with hot coals from the fireplace, close the lid, and then slide it between the sheets. You had to keep it moving so you didn't set the bed on fire. It was like a pre-electric blanket, making bedtime a much cozier experience. When not in use, these beautiful pans were often hung by the fireplace as decoration. Now, let's set the dinner table. One of the most important items was the salt cellar, our 10th object. Salt was a valuable commodity, and how it was displayed on the table was a big deal. The salt cellar, often an elaborate container, was placed near the head of the table where the host and honored guests sat. To be seated above the salt meant you were important. If you were seated below the salt, you were of a lower social standing. It was a subtle but clear indicator of the social hierarchy, right there in the middle of the dinner table. What about sweetening your tea? Sugar wasn't sold in convenient bags like it is today. It came in large, hard cones or loaves that could weigh up to 10 pounds. So how did you get a lump for your cup? You used our 11th object, sugar nippers. These looked like a sturdy pair of pliers with sharp cutting blades. You'd use them to snip off a small piece from the big cone. If you needed granulated sugar for baking, you'd then have to crush that piece with a mortar and pestle. Getting your sugar fix required some serious effort. So you have your salt and your sugar. What are you eating off of? Probably not a fine china plate. Most colonists used our 12th object, a trencher. A trencher was a simple, flat piece of wood, often rectangular, with a shallow section hollowed out in the middle to hold your food. Sometimes two people would even share a single trencher. Forks were not common until later in the 18th century, so people often ate with a spoon or just their hands. From fire buckets and flails to pomanders and whirligigs, these 13 objects paint a vivid picture of colonial life. They show a world of hard work, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the natural world.